Hello, I am here with Marianne Peters to talk a little bit about her art, the art that she has in the show at North Seattle College Gallery, the implications of a simple landscape, and just what's going on with her at the moment.
Good morning.
Welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
I just want to start with a general question of sort of like, where do you live, where do you work, what do you do, the basics of you, and I'm going to change my views. Okay.
Well, I live in North Seattle in the Roosevelt District, and I have lived there since I was a graduate student, where I rented a house and then bought it off my landlord. So I'm a lucky one. I have my own home, but I also have a separate studio, which is in Georgetown at Equinox Studios, a large complex of over 100 artists that has turned out to be a real gift to me to be in this community. And mostly my job is making art. I feel fortunate that that's the truth. Sometimes I teach. Mostly I do talks and I guess I'd have to say other kinds of requests from organizations and schools, be it doing a studio visit or doing an assessment of a class or things like that. Painting and drawing has been the foundation of my work. In fact, I always say that I draw with paint, but I find that in recent years, after a visit to Lebanon, which has its own story, I decided to focus in a more research-based way on other kinds of platforms that I could use to talk about missing histories or dismissed histories that are tied to the Middle East. My family is originally from Syria, but a region that is now Lebanon. And it has given me an opportunity to think about how one can address a really prescient topic in contemporary events, that is the collapse of Syrian communities and civil war in that country, and how it's affected a migration pattern that matched what happened with my family at the turn of the 20th century. Although not always conflict-based, it definitely was a decisive moment to leave the region. And so my work right now is a mix of painting, drawing, and site-based sculptural pieces. And I'm still going to keep doing it until I don't have anything to say.
How are you holding up right now with the coronavirus and sort of having to be separate?
Yeah.
All those things.
Well, I have a fortunate circumstance in that crazily, my social work husband and I managed to buy the house next door to ours 25 years ago. And my daughter now lives there. She was living in Mexico City, and she now has moved back to the States with her young family. She has a 1-year-old son and her husband. And so we have a compound. We basically go back and forth between our two houses, and we share meals and we garden together. And we just, in essence, are hunkered down in a little family unit. I find that a secondary gift is being able to come to my studio. Because there isn't a limitation really on artists going to their studios, I find that this is a real refuge to be able to step out and get out into the city this way. But I literally am locked down like everybody else, except for coming to my studio. I'm fine. I, of course, am concerned for people who are not fine, and doing my best to throw a little bit of support in a variety of directions, from radio to food lifelines to schools. But we all just have to do what we're doing, which is be safe, keep distance, check in.
You said earlier that that your daughter knew a little bit before the rest of us about this.
Yes.
Or the seriousness of this.
Yes, my daughter, again, another fortunate thing, although I confess to it going kicking and screaming at first. She was working in women's global health in Mexico, and because of that connection, had several friends who were epidemiologists and were tracking the virus once it hit China. And she has been using them as guides on how to best protect herself, her family, and and us. And so probably about 10 days, almost 2 weeks before everybody else was doing social distancing, she had kind of enforced that in our family, and prepared us to make sure that we had enough of the necessary items we would need, like certain kinds of food, and so and to psychologically prepare us, which is not a small piece. That's
Right.
a big piece.
Yeah. Have you planted your peas yet?
I have not planted my peas, but I think today could be the day.
I think it's supposed to be a really good day for planting.
Yeah. Yeah.
So my next question is about the work that is in the show, The Implications of a Simple Landscape. What is the work about? Anything you really want to say about the work would be great.
Yeah. Those pieces actually tie into a series I've been doing called Storyboards. And the storyboards are glimpses of little episodic moments that are tied to various migration patterns out of the Middle East. I've been using archived images and contemporary images and comparing them, and have had the opportunity to have been given grants and residencies to go to various places, from Lebanon to Paris to Mexico, to look closely at potential information that I could translate into images. What I've found with the ones that are at the gallery right now is one is tied to an archive from the turn of the 20th century, which is called Traveler. And that piece became the kind of linchpin for a full exhibition called Traveler. And what the pieces are to me are a way of highlighting, I'd have to say almost like stopping points or checkpoints or glances of somebody that was walking and forced to move from one place to another. Traveler is an everyman as far as I'm concerned, and I hope that it translates that way as somebody with they don't know what's in front of them, but they're going. The piece that's called Canopy is, I think, one aspect of collapse in conflict zones is when you lose a section of a city, you lose not only the vitality of the humans that were there, but it gets replaced by a certain kind of silence that is only filled in by the sweep of a wind or the detritus that's hanging. And so that's where that piece came from. It's a combination of a photograph I took in Lebanon and then an image that I found on the web recently. And then finally, the piece that's called Field, I think that I'm not sure that people are aware that an age-old, many years long tactic in conflict zones is to remove the food source. And that image was posted recently of a bombing of a wheat field in a section of Syria that, in essence, wiped out the food source for the people of the region. And I just wanted to paint it because it was a combination of very poignant and also, I thought, beautiful in its degradation. So that's what I did, but that's its source. I do feel it's important for people to know that I have sources, that they're not just inventions, and hopefully it will provide some kind of curiosity about topics that they would not necessarily be familiar with.
Beautiful. What are you working on now in the studio?
I'm trying to get my hand back up. I've said more than once that people don't know that artists are like athletes. You have to kind of keep at it or you lose your chops. And so I've been pulling out old pieces and painting on them just to kind of get the energy back into my hand. And I'm also working on a project idea that is, again, tied to these works out of the Near East, which is aligned with the silk industry in Lebanon that at the turn of the 20th century, at the height of its, I guess I'd have to say, accomplishment, and then its collapse, had a very female-driven component. And I'm researching what that was, what that looked like, and planning on doing a piece that is ongoing, continuation of a series I've been doing called Impossible Monuments. It will go into an exhibition at the Jordan Schnitzler Museum of Art at Washington State University, where I will be having, thankfully, my first solo museum exhibition. And it's about time. And I think one part of the Impossible Monuments that I would want people to know is that they are, for me, incidents or events or some sort of highlight of a cultural transition that is important but would never be elevated to the status of a monument. And they are important to the history of events that make monuments, but they don't have that kind of cachet. So I purposely look for really under the radar, not obvious pieces of a cultural history that I can give some sort of presence to.
Has anything changed in your working because of, you know, the current state of the world, or is it just sort of working?
I mean, you know,
the state of the world is everything that you do.
In light of everything that's going on, art, being an artist is a luxury almost, you know. I mean, I see it as a necessity, but and it will prove to be so. I mean, I'm really grateful. That's the upside of this moment, is suddenly people are being aware of the energy and output of artists, from filmmakers to musicians to visual artists. And I'm hoping that that will launch a new audience for a lot of our organizations in this region who have been really vital both here and nationally. So I feel like that's an important piece. But for me, you know, I just feel like I can only make what I know in this moment. And I am trying to be better informed so that when I do make something that has a visual foundation, that it's resonant for somebody else and not just for me. So that's the task, is thinking things through and drawing. I do a lot of drawing of ideas until I land on something. I try to not negate anything. I try to say every idea is a good idea until I determine it's not. And that's kind of what I'm doing in the studio right now. I think that this kind of curious moment eliminates a lot of the strictures that people don't necessarily consciously adhere to. Like if you use commercial venues, for example, like galleries, that's a different kind of obligation than if you don't use that. If you're only, you know, using nonprofit spaces or alternative spaces or ones where there's not some sort of commercial agreement. And it's all volatile right now, so it doesn't really make any sense to be confining yourself to your ideas, because it's going to change. Things are going to change. Yeah.
What do you have coming up? We talked a little bit about your museum show, so that might be it. But where can we see more of your work?
Well, I show my work at the James Harris Gallery in Seattle. That's my main commercial contact. I am also I have a website like many of us do, although I've had such interesting conversations lately about when are those going to be obsolete? You know, because I think that may be in the works. But so I do a lot of the things locally that are commercially aligned through Jim. I'm also finishing up a huge project for Sound Transit at the North Gate station. I was hired as an artist to do a work that had such incredibly difficult components to me. In fact, I tried not to get the project because I thought I'm really not cut out for this. But they solicited people who had never worked in glass to do a glass project. And that's what has happened. Is my piece is a hand-painted, 120-foot long clear story of the Sound Transit station at North Gate. And it has a secondary site that's like a wayfinder in the north entrance of the station. and it's all hand painted. So big learning curve there, but I'm closing that out now.
So we get to see that at North Seattle College daily if we are,
Yeah, you do.
if we're lucky enough to commute
Yeah,
through that
you do.
station. So.
Yeah, you will. It's called Darner's Prism.
Ah.
And what people don't necessarily know, I sure didn't, is that Washington State has a state insect that's the green darner dragonfly. And I learned that from shuffling through, of course, endless information that a fourth grade class in 1995 came up with an insect for Washington State, and that's it. And then it's also tied to the landscape at Northgate, which is aligned with Licton Springs, which is an important ecological site. And it's one of the most diverse populations in the state. And dragonflies have symbolic and spiritual associations for many, many cultures. And so that's why it's all tied to that.
Yeah, the north end of our campus, North Seattle campus, used to be a sort of a temporary, or I've forgotten what they're called, Vernal Lake.
Yes,
would show up, and so the indigenous people would come, and it's a sacred site for indigenous people.
Exactly.
Who would come for that yearly.
Exactly.
So it's a beautiful history.
Yeah, it is. And it was interesting to think about it, and to think about, if people don't speak English, how are they going to know how to get into the station? So the dragonfly is from other countries I've been in, like, for example, Mexico City. All of its subway station has an image that is the site that you want to get off. And so I painted a dragonfly for people to know that that's how you get in.
Ah, that's wonderful.
Yeah,
it has been an absolute pleasure to talk with you. Is there anything else that you would want to tell us, or,
Well, I would just want to say that it's been a privilege to be in that exhibition with such talented people, and to work with you, who I admire. And I would, of course, if anybody ever wants to do a studio visit or talk to me in some other way, I'm more than open to that. And I'm not going to say anymore. That's going to be my pledge for 2020 and the coronavirus era.
No, you and me both.
I can close with just a little rotation around my studio where I'm sitting, Beautiful. If that would be nice. And you can tell me if you're seeing it, okay?
Perfect.
So the first thing I'm going to show you is a wall of sculptural ideas that are potentials for impossible monuments. Then I'm going to show you a very failed painting, but failed paintings are as common as ones that are successful, and some that I'm redoing, and then a wall of my notes from various installations and residencies that I've done. So I'll just do a little walk around, and hopefully my dog will be okay with that. I'm going to start here. Let's see. Can you see this?
Yeah, if you could go up just a little bit. Yeah.
So these are ideas I'm working on. Am I walking slow enough?
Oh, it's perfect.
Okay. These are not happening. These are, as you see, blank and hopefully filled soon. There's some smaller works that I'm working on. And then this is a wall of my studio with notes.
Oh, it's so lovely to see.
Yeah.
So lovely to see your, like, it's like a sketchbook on a wall.
It is a sketchbook on a wall. I have 1 million empty sketchbooks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't use them. There they are. Yeah. Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. It's really great.
Yeah. Take care, everybody.